Good morning, everybody. Welcome to KYW Newsradio's Executive Briefing, presented by our partners at Independence Blue Cross. My name is David Yagdaroff, Senior Vice President and Market Manager of Entercom Philadelphia. Entercom is a national media and entertainment company based right here on Market Street. You probably know us by our 6 outstanding local brands: KYW Newsradio, now on 103.9 FM, Sports Radio 94 WIP, B101.1, 98.1 WOGL, 96.5 WTDY, and Talk Radio 1210 WPHT. Thank you for joining us for what should be a terrific discussion this morning. In a typical year, we'd be taking advantage of Independence Blue Cross's fabulous space down the street from our studios at Independence Live. Of course, circumstances have changed this year, but we wanted to make sure we brought you the same insightful discussion in a virtual form. I want to thank our friends at IBC, the exclusive sponsor of KYW Medical Reports with Dr. Brian McDonough. We absolutely treasure our longstanding partnership, and thank you for everything you do for us and for the entire Philadelphia community. We consider the January executive briefing to be one of our landmark events of the year. And here's why. Our reporters embed themselves in the community all year long. They report and they dig and they tell stories that matter. This event gives them the opportunity to share a more expansive inside look with you. Collectively, our news team has nearly 500 years of experience. Their dedication to delivering to all of us the most trustworthy information possible on the stories that matter to the residents of our region. And in a time when everyone's looking for trustworthy sources of news, it's comforting to know that here in Philadelphia, you need to look no further than KYW Newsradio. And did I mention that we're now on 103.9 FM? As you can imagine, we're pretty excited about that. We have a fantastic panel of experts this morning, led by our morning anchor, Ian Bush. But before we hear from them, I'd like to introduce my good friend, Donna Farrell, Senior Vice President of Corporate Communications for Independence Blue Cross. Donna?
Thank you so much, David. And I couldn't agree more. I'm thrilled that you're on FM now. I was listening this morning, although I keep forgetting and I go AM, FM, AM, FM. Thank you. It's really great to be here with everyone on a very cold January morning. On behalf of our President and CEO, Greg Devens, our leadership team, and all of our many thousands of associates at Independence who have been hunkering down at home for close to a year, serving our customers and members, thank you. We're really proud to sponsor this event. We love teaming up with Entercom to bring everyone this executive briefing from KYW Newsradio every year. It's always insightful. I can't wait to hear what we're going to learn this year. And boy, we could not have possibly imagined last year what was going to unfold. This is actually the 5th year that Independence has hosted the executive briefing event. And of course, it's the first time we're doing it digitally. We would all prefer to be hosting you at Independence Live, but I know it's going to be phenomenal having everyone being able to be laser focused on what all of these incredible reporters have to share. For our part at Independence, look for us in 2021 to continue promoting and supporting initiatives that help promote healthy and sustainable communities. This year in particular, strong focus on health equity and mental health, and of course, continuing our community leadership to beat COVID-19 as we all continue to fight this terrible pandemic. So thank you again for having us and giving us this opportunity to bring this to everyone. We're thrilled to be part of it. And now here's KYW's Newsradio morning anchor, Ian Bush, who will moderate our program. Ian?
Hey, thanks a lot, Donna, and thanks to Independence Blue Cross, a really valued sponsor of ours and an important corporate partner in the city, an important public health partner for us all. Your focus on mental health this year couldn't be more prescient. So we wish we could be in your beautiful space, our usual executive briefing digs at Independence Live. But once we beat COVID-19, as your commercials say, and everybody's healthy, we'll be back there. And all of our pixelated friends on this Zoom call will be with us in person once again. And thank you for being here this morning. We know your time is valuable. We appreciate you spending it with us this morning and every day when you tune in to 103.9 FM. For our insider's look this morning at 2021, though, I do have to say there are bonus points for anybody whose virtual background includes the Bernie Sanders meme. And we will even allow a reenactor as long as you have authentic warm woolen mittens from Vermont. So we'll be looking for those. You'll be able to ask questions in the chat box, and we'll try to get to as many as we can. I am aware that Zoom fatigue is a very real thing, so I'm going to introduce our reporter experts, and we will get going. Cherry Gregg, our community affairs reporter, host of our weekly community affairs show Flashpoint. Jim Melwert, our suburban bureau chief. Pat Loeb is with us this morning, our City Hall bureau chief. Also spent a lot of time in Wilmington and Washington, D.C. over the past several months reporting on the Biden campaign and now Biden administration. Mike DiNardo, who heads the education beat for us. And Kristen Johansson, our crime and justice reporter, is with us as well. Also, the man with whom we are going to begin today's briefing, our medical editor and practicing physician, Dr. Brian McDonough. Doc, new daily COVID infections have been falling by about a third over the past few weeks. Deaths have remained mostly flat in this country. A really staggering 4,000 or so of our fellow Americans are dying from COVID or with COVID every day. We are making some progress, but I wonder, how much do these COVID variants, the UK, the South Africa, the Brazil variants of coronavirus, how much should they concern us? How much do they concern you?
Now for the most popular words of 2020.
Are you
You're on mute.
All right, maybe while we try to raise Dr. B.
Just unmuted myself. I might have been on double mute. Can you hear me now?
Hey, Doc. Yeah, we got you.
I just done this dramatic intro. Basically, I just wanted to say, though, this is really strange, but, Independence Blue Cross talked about the relationship. I started in 1988, and literally half my life now, I've been doing daily reports like every single day on KYW about health, and we've covered everything from HIV to the present pandemic. And I don't think there's been any more important work than what we've done in the last year. And KYW, thank goodness, to give me the opportunity to talk about it every day, every angle. So I think you live it in your personal life, and you're able to share it through patients and then also on the air. To answer your question more directly, Ian, these variants always frighten me, because what I know about COVID-19 or about the coronavirus is it has an incredible ability to mutate. So as a result of that, it has the opportunity. By the way, I'm on video now. I'm just looking. It says start video, but do you see me or not? Because I just want to make sure I'm not.
Hit that start video button so we can see that.
I will do that. I can push start video. Yeah.
There he is. The good doctor.
I noticed I wasn't popping up. So anyway, so I do the best I can with the technical things. But so basically what happened is we look at these variants, and they concern us because of mutation. But right now, I can tell you a couple things about the Brazilian and the variant we saw in the UK. The first thing is that they are more aggressive in how you acquire them. In other words, they spread faster. And because of that, they may become the dominant strain. But right now, with the information we have, as of yesterday, CDC report I saw, they're not more aggressive in how they damage you or affect you. So essentially, the vaccines we have now work. It attacks the same as, not more aggressive. The thing is, it spreads easier. So that's the complication there we're worried about.
Talk about risk mitigation. We've heard a lot in the last couple of weeks, especially about double masking. What do you think about that?
I think double masking, anything you can do to reduce the entrance of the virus to your body or to spread it out is great. So if everybody were just to wear a single mask, that's a major effective way to do it. Double masking provides support when you're looking at certain situations. If you're going to be in a room or an environment with someone more than 15 minutes, especially if you don't know their status and if they're COVID positive, the double mask provides that extra protection. Because if you think about in the business world, they have that Swiss cheese model. where they take a piece of Swiss cheese and they say that something could go through the Swiss cheese easily. But if you put a second piece of Swiss cheese, it's harder to break through because the holes are random. At a microscopic level, that's kind of what you see by wearing two masks. I don't think it's always necessary. I think where I would recommend it is if you have to, and I'm not a big fan of travel right now, but if you had to take a flight, or if you're going to be on a train or in a bus or in a car with other people for a prolonged period, that's where I would go with the two masks. If you're just, at your workplace and you're going through, or if you are at an area where you maybe have to get to the food store back and forth, I think one mask is enough. Just make sure you cover your nose too. Some people just drop them below the nose. The easiest way for the virus to get in there and have the highest concentration is through the nose. There's more receptors there, there's more areas there. So a lot of people, for whatever reason, don't cover their nose. I can't watch football or sports without really getting frustrated, because I see the coaches with their masks down. I'm like, what's the point here? I know they're trying to yell, but I go, please put the mask up. Or other people leaving their noses exposed, because I know that's how the virus, it seeks an opening and it goes for it.
Right. I know you and I are watching Villanova basketball games, and we see the coaches pull the mask down to yell at the players, and where that's the time where you want to leave the mask up most of all.
Yes.
All the time. I just want to remind our audience, you can use the Q&A feature in Zoom. At the bottom of Zoom, there's a little Q&A with little speech bubbles above it to ask questions of Dr. Bryan and any of our guests. Hey, Doc, what's your assessment of where we are right now in terms of the COVID vaccine and the promises from the Biden administration on what would happen in the near future, what they promised to happen in the near future?
Well, it just so happens right now, I have the numbers. We've distributed 41,418,328 total doses, which we've distributed. But right now, as far as people getting two doses, we're at about 3,346,000. So we have a long way to go with 330 million people. I am excited that there's a focus on this. That you hear the president talking about it. I heard that he actually, if he's in other meetings, wants to know what's going on. That tells me it's top of mind, which is good. I listen to a lot of things, and I know that in Europe they're very frustrated. They're not able to get in the EU, for instance, much vaccine out at all. We are now building and getting the vaccine out. My concern with the vaccine right now is the operationalization of it. I work in my own world and trying to get vaccines through my healthcare system, and I know that what's really tough is getting the vaccine in, getting the people in and registered, and then getting the vaccine in their arms. That seems to be the barrier. And the one fact that I think was tough for everybody was you didn't know what dose how much you were getting. And think about it, you're planning. You want two doses. So if you have 100 doses, you want to make sure you have 100 doses to be given in 3 weeks for Pfizer or 4 weeks for Moderna. So if you give them all out and you don't know you're getting the next batch, what's going to happen to your people when it's due? So that knowledge that you're getting more and what you're getting, I think, is a very valuable thing. So that's helpful. But it's a major undertaking, and it's something that I think they're getting there. But my big thing, we're talking about, we want to make sure we get it throughout the entire community too, those who really need it, and we don't have those disparities. We'll make sure that where we need to get it, we get it.
Dr. Bryan, thanks. Yeah, let's take a closer look at the vaccine rollout in our area and start with Jim Melwart on that. Jim, you've been focused on how the suburban counties and state government have been handling the pandemic and now the vaccine supply. Where do we stand? Is there reason for optimism, say, for late winter, early spring?
Yeah, well, obviously, if anyone's been trying to get the vaccine for themselves or for loved ones, they know the recent expansion to 65 plus has been difficult. And it's especially difficult for people who thought they were next up in line. So that's kind of been the root of the frustration, and asking the state health department about how they're giving out vaccine or allocating vaccine. Basically, outside of Philadelphia gets their own, and you'll hear from Pat how they get it from the federal government because of one of the largest cities. Everywhere else in Pennsylvania, the Pennsylvania Health Department determines how much they get. And so the challenge for, say, Montgomery County is their allotment is coming from Pennsylvania Department of Health, and they have to follow the rules that Pennsylvania Department of Health sets. And so when Pennsylvania Department of Health says we're expanding this to 65 plus, Montgomery County has to expand to 65 plus. And the frustration, and I'm using Montgomery County as an example, Chester County and Bucks County are dealing with the same issues, and Delaware County through Chester County. But the issue is Montgomery County has a lot of large hospitals, a lot of large health systems, a lot of senior centers. So they were all, 1A was already large for Montgomery County compared to other parts of Pennsylvania. You add in 65 plus and all the healthcare workers, and it's difficult for them to get through, but there's no change in the allocation coming from the Department of Health. In a press briefing earlier this week, the Department of Health clearly was, well, I don't want to say clearly, but they were kind of expressing frustration and confusion on their part in what they thought they were getting from the federal government when they expanded to 65 plus. It was their understanding that they were going to throw open the surplus, as Dr. Bryan talked about, the first shot and the second shot. The understanding was the federal government was holding back that second shot, and they were going to open up warehouse doors, and those second shots were going to roll out. Well, it turned out that warehouse didn't exist, and that surplus of second shots didn't exist. So a state like Pennsylvania, that has one of the highest 65 plus populations in the country, is now struggling to get through the current eligibility before you can get to teachers to get schools open, before you can get to postal workers to keep the mail flowing. And so there's a lot of frustration. Is there optimism? Well, again, you'll hear from Pat about the Biden plan and what they're talking about, expanding the stockpile and being able to get more out. But the frustration in Pennsylvania and in the suburban counties is until they target 65 plus populations, it's going to continue to be a challenge to get to other groups.
Thanks for addressing that important issue. We had a question about how the expansion could impact the downstream availability for frontline workers, essentials, and for the rest of us. Dr. Bryan, one question that popped up, any chronic conditions where getting the vaccine would not be recommended?
We haven't seen that, which is really good. We're actually looking at the vaccine side effects and concerns and what we're watching already. And most people are doing very well with the vaccine. And in fact, if you have chronic conditions, you probably would benefit more from getting the vaccine. So we're not as worried about it. It's an mRNA vaccine, so it's different in the way it's made than a lot of other vaccines. So it isn't like we have to worry about whether they're allergic to egg yolk or things like that, that it's better that way.
May I ask if you have received it, being a practicing physician?
Yes, I received 2 doses relatively early on, working in the ICU and things. And I got the Pfizer dose, and I've been watching a lot of my colleagues, nurses and others, and watching as they get it, and have seen firsthand, what the side effects and concerns are. My personal experience was first dose, arm got really stiff. Second dose, I felt achy. I felt as if you feel like if you haven't ran or played a sport and then you do it and you get this, well, it's a buildup of lactic acid, but you get this pain in your body, you feel heavy. That happened for about a week. I was kind of fatigued and just tight. Nothing that I would report as a concern. What I have seen people with second doses and first doses, the biggest concerns, some people have had fevers, and some people have referred to feeling like pretty sick for about a 36-hour period. That's the extreme. Again, a small price to pay for, the fact that you're getting protection, which again, now that I'm out now 2 weeks for my second dose, so I should be theoretically at 94 to 96% protected based on the stats they have.
None of your colleagues regrets getting the vaccine, having suffered these kind of minor side effects?
No, I got to tell you, as you can imagine, any worker who's on the front lines in so many different ways, you try to suppress it, but there's an anxiety always with you, with the concern, because you don't know if you'll be the person who gets very seriously sick. So because we don't know that, are concerned about it. So having that level of protection, it kind of makes you feel a little more emboldened and fortunate. And it also makes me more eager to get the vaccine out to everybody, because I realize we got to get these shots in the arms, because what it means, everybody's anxious and they're concerned. So if they want that vaccine, we got to get it to them.
Pat Loeb, our audience will have heard about the problems this week involving the city's relationship with the organization Philly Fighting COVID. And indeed, a national audience is now hearing about it by way of the Washington Post. Their headline was "A Vaccine Disaster in Philadelphia." Also this morning, the CEO was on the Today Show. Their Chiron graphic said "Vaccine Disaster in Philly." Is what went on with Philly Fighting COVID, the vaccine situation in microcosm in the city?
Oh, no, no. Actually, I fear that it's overwhelming the actually very good rollout that Philadelphia has had. 7% of the adult population in Philadelphia has been vaccinated. That's better than the rest of the state as a whole, and better than 42 other states as well. They've used more than 80% of the vaccine they've received. They've done more than 90,000 first doses, 24,000 second doses. So they're not lagging in those second doses the way the national picture is. Actually, Philadelphia was one of the 4 entities that were charged with figuring out the vaccine rollout. And they had a plan, and it was multimodal clinics, hospitals and health systems, pharmacies. They started using nonprofits to do testing. This was largely a product of the Black Doctors COVID-19 Consortium that said, offload some of the testing to us. We don't need to be a certified lab. We can do the tests and send the kits off to get the results. And so then this other group of volunteers came, Philly Fighting COVID, and the city said, yes, we want to get as many people tested. We want lots and lots of testing. This is one of the key prevention measures to get everybody tested. So they contracted with them for testing. And then as the 1A rollout came along, the unaffiliated healthcare workers became really concerned about how they would get their shots, because they were all being given through hospitals. So this group of volunteers, Philly Fighting COVID, said, actually, we have a plan all ready to go for this, and we can do these mass clinics. And so, I think the city said the hospitals, first they were overwhelmed with COVID patients, and a lot of them were at maximum capacity, and now they're overwhelmed inoculating their own staff. So, okay, let's get the unaffiliated workers immunized at the convention center. And this mass thing with this group has masterminded turned out to be a terrible decision, because it turned out that the leader of this group did all kinds of crazy things. Let's just sum it up that way. And so the city cut ties with the group. They are reserving second doses for everybody. Now the group had to report everybody that they inoculated. And so the city has all that information, and will get second doses to all of those people, but they won't be associated with that group anymore. And, the city has been fighting this for 10.5 months, has done a good job of protecting its citizens. Now it's trying to get them inoculated. And it's doing all of this with no federal guidance and no additional funding from the federal government. And so, well, there was some in the last CARES Act, but this vaccine rollout, all its flaws, all of, this misstep that some people seem to be taking great glee in, it's a system failure. It comes from a failure of federal leadership. And that is, I think, part of the reason that Joe Biden won the election, our own Delaware Joe. And he is determined to fix it. And he has appointed a czar to be in charge of the program. He's restored science. Yesterday, we carried a briefing led by Dr. Anthony Fauci, and I was listening thinking, wow, this is really boring. There's no injecting sunlight into our veins or any kinds of fun stuff like that. But I think boring is what is going to be needed here.
Pat, thanks. Cherry Gregg, ICG. I haven't seen some of these people in person, my lovely colleagues, in like a year. Cherry, you have been focused on equity issues surrounding the vaccine, and the Black community has a hard-earned distrust of vaccines, and a cursory reading of American history will explain that pretty easily. How successful can a GOTV, a Get Out the Vaccine effort, be in the face of what are really deep historical wounds?
It's a tough job. I mean, it's not just a job that's being undertaken in Philadelphia, but across the country. As you mentioned, I mean, things like the Tuskegee experiment come to mind right off the top. Black people being used in experiments and allowed to die for government data. And so a lot of people don't want to get the vaccine. 35% of African Americans in a recent survey said they just wouldn't do it. And of the 65% or so, 75%, 70% or so that said that they would do it, half of those people said they wanted to wait and see. And so this was an uphill battle. Earlier this month, I think, because even though Philadelphia is 44% African American, only 10% of the vaccines had gone to African American people. That has since gone up. Now that the Black Doctors COVID-19 Consortium is part of it, that number is now 12.7% African Americans have been vaccinated. So we saw a slight bump of that as they rolled out their vaccine in phase 1B. I think one weekend they did about 1,000 vaccines, got them into arms. And what the Black doctors were able to do was use the network that they built during doing testing. And they set up pop-up testing sites back beginning in April, eventually got a city contract and had developed this trust within the African-American community. Even Dr. Ayla Stanford, she's the founder of the group, she wasn't going to get the vaccine initially because she had COVID. And, if you had COVID-19, you have about 6 months of immunity, but she did it anyway because she knew how important that trust was. But I also want to mention that, Philadelphia is 13% Latino, but only 3.2% of those vaccinated are Latino. And to be fair, about 14% of people who did get vaccines did not identify their race. So we don't know. At the same time, Philadelphia is 35% white, yet more than half of the vaccines have gone to white people. So there's a lot of work to be done to deal with the issue of vaccine hesitancy, to build up the level of trust, and to get vaccine into the arms of people who need it. We all heard how hard COVID-19 has been on African-American communities. I mean, we're 3.5 times more likely to get it, and we're more likely to die. I've lost family members. I personally had COVID-19, although it wasn't bad for me, but just sort of like getting this information to people, building up this trust. And most of the people I talk to don't want to go to certain types of organizations to get the vaccine. So having organizations like the Black Doctors COVID-19 Consortium that has a relationship, they go to churches, they go to charter schools in communities, and people feel they feel a level of trust and acceptance, and they're more willing to do it in those cases. And so we hope that communities of color will get access to these vital tools to fight this to fight this virus over time. But there's a lot of work to do, Ian. There's a lot of work.
Dr. Brian, Cherry mentioned getting the vaccine after you've had COVID. The advice is to do that, correct? And also a question from our audience with many pregnant employees concerned about getting the vaccine. What's your advice to them?
First of all, to answer your first point, yes. If you have COVID, you still want to get the vaccine to provide that protection, because as Sherry mentioned, we think it's 6 months, but we don't really know the protection you get. And at least if you're in when you get the vaccine, they're following those people out. Now, about pregnancy, a lot of talk about that. There were only a few people in the initial studies who were pregnant, and those people did not have any issues associated with it. So from an evidence-based standpoint, we have no reason to suspect there would be problems, and we would encourage people to get the vaccine. What I've been telling my patients and others is, it's a personal decision if you're pregnant, but far and away, any risk that we theoretically could have with a vaccine is superseded by the problems you can have if you contracted COVID. We have seen when people are pregnant and they get COVID, certainly many can do fine, but with the problems with blood clotting and other issues that occur, we've had problems with pregnancies and in fetal mortality. So it's important that that group is considered and continued as well. There's also been, I guess, one of these things on the internet that kind of flowed that is it going to affect fertility for women asking, is it going to affect fertility? There's no information or anything to suggest that it would cause a problem. Obviously, you have to follow these vaccines for years, and we're learning it in real time. But what we've seen is, and based on what we know about mRNA vaccines, it's pretty safe.
Mike DiNardo, you brought us word yesterday of the back to the classroom date for Philadelphia students. It's been hundreds of days since they had in-person instruction. Yet another story about the Philadelphia school board today. You think this is going to happen to the superintendent's plan? Hey, Mike, I think you're on mute. There we go.
I was saying wonderful things there too. If you're asking, do I think the plan will go into effect and students will return to the classroom on February 22nd? My gut feeling is yes, although not everybody is on board. As you know, the Philadelphia Federation of Teachers has major concerns. And number one, they want all of their members to be vaccinated before they return to the classroom. You have evidence from the CDC and testimony from doctors that in-person transmission in schools is relatively small, and the school district is relying on that guidance. But the teachers union, they're concerned about putting themselves in harm's way by returning to the classroom. So they're not completely on board. And if you just do the math, 20,000 employees in the school district and the city is getting 20,000 doses of the vaccine per week, it would take a long time to vaccinate all of the teachers. And Superintendent Height yesterday said it would actually threaten any in-person learning this year if they waited until all the teachers were vaccinated to put them back in the classroom. Having said that, why I say that I think they will ultimately return to the classroom, the union and the school district are still negotiating. They're still talking about a memorandum of agreement that they signed back in the fall. And that agreement outlined various standards that had to be met before teachers could return to the building. And in many cases, in 10% of the schools, the ventilation standards haven't been met yet. And the union is saying, hey, we're not going back until these standards are met. Jerry Jordan said to me yesterday that he's not going to go as far as Chicago did. You may be aware that Chicago teachers threatened to strike over a return to the classroom. That's not the issue in Philadelphia. Jordan isn't going that far, but he is saying that he wants evidence from the school district that it is safe for his members to return. So he's still advocating for his members, but ultimately, if they can't come to an agreement over that memorandum, it can go to a third party for an arbitration thing. Long story short, yes, I think ultimately there will be a limited return to the classroom. Now, this is only for 9,000 students, pre-K through second grade, only going 2 days a week. The next phase is for 3rd through 12th graders with special needs, but the district hasn't said when they will roll out that particular segment of students. And Superintendent Height has said it's very possible that some students won't go back into school buildings at all this year.
Kristen Johansson, hello. You have found yourself, Kristen, at the intersection of concurrent pandemics, we could call it, both COVID, of course, and gun violence in this city. Has COVID influenced the latter at all, do you think?
Well, I think what's interesting is the police commissioner said we'll never have another year like 2020, so we'll have nothing to compare it to, which I just think is an interesting thing to think about, because many leaders in this city kind of point to COVID being the issue for gun violence, that people are more desperate, that people have less opportunities, and therefore there may be more robberies, home invasions, arguments. But one of the things that has been interesting is that many of the crimes, they call them part-run crimes, they kind of they differentiate what a violent crime is versus a not violent crime. So things like theft, vandalism, those types of things, or I should say robberies, have actually been going down because people are inside their homes. There's obviously the businesses are closed. So those have gone down, but the shootings and the homicides, they're really record highs. We know that there were 2,200 shootings in 2020, probably a little bit more than that. And then there were 499 homicides, and that's just one less than the last time, the 1990, where we had 500 homicides. So still a record high. But again, with the commissioner, what she said is that we're never really going to experience this again in this type of environment. Obviously, there was we had the protests and the unrest after George Floyd's murder, which, yes, there was vandalism, yes, there was theft, but that was and it was reported, but still we had that, the theft and burglaries and robberies down. So it's been very interesting covering this beat. Courts were also closed throughout this. They're still closed. The jury trials kind of pop back up in about September or so. And then quickly, kind of about late October, we're shut back down. So we'll see what 2021 rolls out, but I do know that the commissioner now has all of her people in place. And so she wants to roll out her own plan and hopefully get this gun violence down. This is something that is really affecting all of us. Cherry and I talk about it often for different stories that we're doing. It's a sad situation in Philadelphia right
now. You'll have seen the Inquirer editorial calling for Police Commissioner Outlaw to get the boot. They wrote that the police created chaos and danger instead of delivering order and safety at the protest against the death of George Floyd, the police killing of George Floyd in Minneapolis, and the tear gassing of protesters on 676. Cherry, where you were, and I'm sorry, Kristen, where you were, and I know, Cherry, you were involved in some police response like that too. I'm not asking for your opinions on this, but I'm asking for your opinion on, the major city newspaper calling for the resignation of the police commissioner, or Mayor Kenny to show her the door.
Personally, I don't know if we're asking both of us, but I know both Cherry and I have actually talked to the commissioner. She hasn't, I believe, had enough time. I spoke to her at the end of 2020, had to sit down with her, and I don't, she kind of put it out bluntly, like, she's made mistakes, they've had mistakes, but they've also never had a year like this with the unrest, with the pandemic, with gun violence. And she's brand new to this city. She doesn't know this city. I don't think that we can generally wave a magic wand for any one person to solve gun violence and crime in this city. We have to do, but I think that generally the audience always wants to blame or look or point at one person when it's everybody. And, I've seen stories about people saying, what are you doing about gun violence? What are you doing about the shootings personally? Are you mentoring people? Are you trying to invest in education and funding? There's a guy that both Cherry and I have talked to, just Scott Charles, who literally sees these kids that are shot every single day. Good timing with the police sirens out my window, who talk to these people every day and say, it really isn't going to be this one solution. this one brand new idea that's going to solve all of gun violence. So I think to say, let's just get rid of this one person, she's the problem, that's wrong.
And I want to
climbing.
Yeah, and I want to piggyback on what Kristen said. First of all, she started February 11th, I believe. March 12th, 13th, the city was on COVID-19 lockdown. 4 weeks after her being here. Then a few weeks after that, full out chaos in the city because of the death of George Floyd happening in another city. And you're still required to operate under COVID restrictions. She lost like 5 officers to COVID-19. So this was real for her officers as well. And you're talking about police, and I had a chance to speak to her recently about this, and she's under scrutiny. She's an outsider who came into Philadelphia. We know how Philadelphia is. She didn't even get a chance to get to know her officers because 4 weeks after she got here, we were on lockdown and we couldn't do anything in person. So I think that if she had been homegrown in Philadelphia, that would not be the response. The response would be, let's give her the benefit of the doubt. We have all dropped balls in this COVID-19 world. And I'm not saying she's been perfect, but I don't know if any other leader would have necessarily knocked it out of the park here. This is unprecedented on so many levels. And I think that her being, woman of color, being from outside of the city, under these extreme circumstances. I mean, these are extreme circumstances. We got to give her the benefit of the doubt. And I think that's basically what Kristen was saying. And also, this gun violence issue has been popping up in all cities. I mean, and it's very tragic. But this isn't the only issue. I mean, we're seeing upticks in domestic violence, upticks in child abuse. I mean, people's mental health is being challenged right now. And all of this has a connection to police because police are first responders. And so I would hold off on like making broad decisions like that without giving her a real opportunity to put forth plans versus having to sit in reaction as we all have had to do as we battled not just COVID-19, but racial unrest, economic tailspins, all sorts of things. So I just think it's premature at this point. That's my, I know you didn't say opinion, but I think there are mixed opinions within the community, but given this year, as Kristen said, this is unlike any we've ever seen and probably unlike any we'll ever see. Benefit of the doubt.
Yeah, we're a city that is barely giving the new Eagles coach, Nick Sirianni, the benefit of the doubt, not even giving the poor guy a chance before he walked through the door, not equating the two in any way. Dr. Bryan, another question for you from our audience. How long should you wait once you've recovered from COVID to get the vaccine? Any guidance on that?
We're learning a little bit about that. I think what they're suggesting you do now is you want to make sure you get through that initial period. You have COVID, and then you actually have no symptoms, and then you are able to go back to work. People that are now saying, they're saying 60 to 120 days is what they're saying right now. The CDC, if you notice, they're vague about it because they're trying to figure it out. But if you think about it, as we talked about earlier, you have this layer of protection, and you're going to be fine, and we can get you later. They also are now not saying be tested again. You're going to go forward, because we've had cases where somebody may have had COVID, they want the vaccine, and then they're wondering, can they get the vaccine? The only time we're not giving people the vaccine is if they have some sort of symptoms. If somebody says they have a sore throat or those types of things, we say, listen, we're holding off your vaccine. Those questions are very specific, because we don't want to do two things. We don't want to give a vaccine to someone who obviously is under the weather, but also if someone has COVID and brings it into that setting, we got to be careful as well. So it's interesting with COVID. What we've seen is most things I've ever studied in medicine, it's like 30, 50 years of information, and we kind of develop a medicine and we come up with a treatment and we have the evidence. We're learning this real time. I mean, I know there's a lot of criticism about early on, should you wear masks, you shouldn't. These people were these people were actually just making a point of saying that we're learning, and it's okay to say you did something that wasn't exactly correct. You do the best with the information you have. I think by and large, it's very similar to the police situation. unprecedented situation with unprecedented challenges.
Hey, Jim Melward, an election is probably the last thing people want to think about now, but Pennsylvania was central to the fight over the result of 2020. Even though none of the court rulings affected the result itself, do they affect future elections?
Absolutely. There's going to be a lot coming out of Pennsylvania in the coming months. Legislation to change Act 77, which is the legislation that allowed mail-in voting, or no excuse mail-in voting, expanded absentee ballots basically to anyone without an excuse for this past year. And so we can expect to see a lot of debate over changes. Obviously, Republicans are going to say we need to tighten up the rules. We need to make sure that there's not the fraud that they've been saying that there is, that really hasn't been proven. There were a handful of cases of people who did manage to get a duplicate ballot, but nothing significant. But they are going to continue the fight to tighten up restrictions on getting ballots or on applying for voter registration and ballots. And there will likely be some votes, referendums on the ballots this year, addressing several things. That could be part of it. But there are some interesting cases, and obviously the Trump campaign and Donald Trump's lawyers sucked the oxygen out of the room with the claims that they were making. But there were other issues across the state, and again, it was the initial rollout of mail-in voting. So there are things that do need to be addressed in how counties are dealing with. You have one county that's counting ballots without a signature on them. You have another county that's not. So they do need to uniformly decide going forward how they're going to count these ballots, and they need to do it in a way that's fair. They need to do it in a way that brings everyone into the conversation. Obviously, we know it's more difficult for some people to get IDs than other people. Urban areas where people don't drive, they're less likely to have a driver's license. Therefore, they may not have a photo ID, and it may not be easy for them to get a photo ID, as it is for me living out here in Montgomery County, where I have 4 within 20 minutes that I could drive to. So there's a lot of fairness issues, and the nuance, of course, gets lost in the political debate because people are trying to stake their territory. You hope that the entire conversation comes into it, but definitely there were a lot of issues again that got overshadowed by claims from the Trump campaign and from Donald Trump's lawyers that so many of those were proven to be unfounded. And had no basis in actual reality. And even when they got into court in some of these cases, they had to admit, we can't back that up. But again, a great example, and not to go too far into the weeds, but a great example is a case in Western PA in the Pennsylvania Senate, where a Senate district straddled 2 counties, and one county, Allegheny County, counted ballots that didn't have a signature on it, and Westmoreland County didn't count ballots that didn't have a signature on the outside envelope. And how does that affect the race, and should there be a uniform way to do it? And the courts determined that they weren't going to throw out ballots, and that's controversial to some people, because by the letter of the law and by what the Secretary of State said, they're not supposed to count them. So there are a lot of issues, and to avoid a lot of the complications and a lot of the problems that we ran into after the election, it should be a bipartisan conversation to make sure that these rules are followed uniformly, and again, not politicizing them, not trying to storm the Capitol and take over the country, but actually have a discussion on, this is new. We did it once, and it was a lot bigger, obviously, with the pandemic than anybody expected it to be. Multiple times more mail-in ballots were used than they expected because of the pandemic. So it was more challenging, but it was also made more challenging because legislators purposely didn't deal with it. And that was staked out arguably for political gain. Instead of addressing the problems beforehand, they found that there could be potential political gain by leaving things hanging open and then making a battle over it. So hopefully that doesn't happen going forward.
Yeah, the signature thing was a personal concern of mine because I think my signature must have changed since I registered to vote, God knows how long ago. And now I can, I have a worse signature than a doctor, Dr. Brian. I'm sure it wouldn't match, but, does my vote count? Speaking of future elections, our city reporters, we have an important primary in Philadelphia coming up in May.
We do. We have the district attorney primary. And so far only, so it's Larry Krasner is our district attorney right now. And right now it looks like it'll be between him and Carlos Vega, who's a former prosecutor. There's also Charles Peruto, who's another defense attorney, has kind of said that he's going to run, but it's very loose. I don't even know if he's even formed a PAC yet. But even so, I know that he and Vega have worked together and know each other. So I'm not sure he'll actually run against Vega. But it's going to be interesting because the two actually are right now involved in a lawsuit where Carlos Vega says that Larry Krasner fired him for his age and his race. So there's kind of a civil lawsuit that has been brewing. So it's going to be a very contentious race, I think, in the coming months. And it'll be Pat and I covering it.
Yeah, this is the most off-year elections in the city, but it is the DA and the city controller. And of course, she put out that after action report yesterday. The timing, I don't know, was it a campaign issue? She paid Ballard Spahr, a very large law firm, to do it instead of doing it internally. You can decide if that's a good use of taxpayers' funds because she's supposed to be the taxpayers' watchdog. But she has no competition in the primary, so looks like a shoo-in.
Hey, Jim, you and Pat reported from Washington after or amid the riot at the Capitol. We're about to see a former president likely put on trial after he was impeached for inciting an insurrection. Given what you guys saw in D.C. that day and what you know now, knowing where we are now as a country, can you pontificate on where you see a united America? Like, is it possible? Can that be a thing?
Well, that's an interesting question. Yeah, and by the way, people who are on this right now, there's the Q&A feature down there, and we love taking questions, and we would love to have your input. Challenge us, push us on things. If you hear us say something, please, weigh in, ask some questions. We want to hear what you're thinking. But to that, Ian, I think and I think I'll speak for everyone on this panel. It's been several years of being. It's very challenging to be a journalist, to be a reporter. And this past year, these past several months, this past election has by far been the most challenging. I hate censorship of any form, but we also need to make sure that we're not confusing free speech with hate speech. And how do you draw that line, and where do you draw the line? And how do we as journalists decide, when are we giving oxygen to a flame that shouldn't have oxygen? And when are we doing our duty of providing information to people? And that is not an easy choice. And in the world we're in right now, there are media outlets, large media outlets, that are fueling alternate realities, factless alternate realities. And as long as that happens, I don't know how we can talk about coming back to a society where we can have where we can disagree respectfully, and where we can have conversations to try to solve really difficult problems like pandemics without politicizing it. I mean, masks became political, things like that. Like that is, so as long as we have these alternate realities, and look, I'm not saying that everyone, look, I had a journalism professor at Temple. I don't know if anyone else had him, Lynn Washington. And one of the lines that he would say all the time, that I say all the time, is, you don't have to think like me, but you do have to think. And I think that's where we need to get back. The people just, we shouldn't agree. We work better when we don't agree, but we do need to operate in the same reality, and people do need to use their brains.
Yeah, we had nearly 4 years ago to the day, probably, that the alternative facts line was uttered on the White House lawn. I say united America. I think getting back to at least an America with less vitriol would be a good start.
Yeah, just the respect, again, the respectful dialogue, the respectful and rational, reasonable debate grounded in facts. And you talk about Pat and I being down in Washington, and seeing the aftermath. We stood out there that evening as the crowd dispersed, and then we were out there again the next morning. And I was standing on the corner by the Supreme Court across the street from the Capitol, and people were just walking up. Some people out walking their dogs. That probably is their typical route, and just standing there and staring. And you could see the plywood over the windows that were smashed in the front of the Capitol. And people just stopping and staring and just looking, and National Guard lining the sidewalk. And, that image will be with me forever. And you're seeing, it's interesting as you look at the cases that the government's bringing against people who are accused of being involved in that, a pretty regular line in each one of the complaints, the criminal complaints against these people, is that they say they were acting at the request of the president. And is that part of a larger effort from the Department of Justice to build a larger case? Who knows? But it is interesting to see that the government is putting that line into each of these complaints. So that's certainly not over. And these are working there's so many working their way through the court system, and the U.S. Attorney's Office in D.C. obviously has never dealt with a volume like this. So it'll be interesting to see the timelines and to see how this works out.
Dr. Bryan, so many questions about the vaccine. Here's another one. Are there concerns with getting the shot when one is prescribed an ongoing biologic, so where the immune system is intentionally suppressed?
Okay, now that is one where I use this, but it's important. Make sure you check with the physician who prescribed it, because those biologics are used for a wide variety of conditions. And they may look at that, they may say, let's wait a little while, let's look risk versus benefit. But again, because of the nature of an mRNA vaccine and the fact that really what they're doing is they're just inserting a little bit of that virus genetically into your system, it should not trigger other things. But people who have autoimmune issues, other issues like that, they want to look at it more closely. And this is a case where if you are going to watch, and I think those who can't get the vaccine right now and they're waiting on waiting lists, watching and seeing is also smart as well, as we're learning. I'm a big believer, if you can get it when you can, when it's your turn. From an ethics standpoint, I tell people, do not have any guilt. If it is your turn and it's your time to get it, get it. It's unethical to jump the line, but it clearly is ethical to get it when it's your turn and not feel bad about it, because there's a reason why it's your turn. And I think that's important.
Mike, a question for you. Is the original K through 2 rollout on Feb 22nd likely to be expanded for all grades into March 2021 and for the remainder of the school year?
It's probably likely to be expanded, but we don't quite know when. Superintendent Height said as much yesterday, that the plan at some point is to get more teachers and more students back into the classroom, but they're looking at a lot of metrics. They're watching the case counts. They're waiting to see. It's not dependent on the vaccine, but that's a factor that, of course, they're looking at. So yes, the next group to go back into the classrooms would be 3rd through 12th graders with special needs, but I can't say March. It could be April, it could be May. Again, the superintendent said it's very possible that there will be some students who just don't go back to school this year. Liz, maybe you, I don't know, but it's very possible that some students, especially in the upper grades, may spend the entire year on their Chromebooks.
Hey, Lizzie Melward, can you tell us what your dad says after he does every report?
He's asking, what do I say when I'm done my report? At the Suburban Bureau.
At the Suburban Bureau.
I think she's a little shy.
Get her a union card.
I'm not.
Right. All right.
Hey, Pat, one for you.
That was him.
One question for you, Pat. Do we know what the city criteria used to select, what criteria, I'm sorry, the city used to select Philly Fighting? Seems like there was a lack of proper review before they selected the organization.
Well, I thought I explained there was no criteria. This was not, they weren't under contract with the city for vaccinations. They were under contract for testing, which they did a lot of testing. And then the city had this problem of vaccinating unaffiliated healthcare workers. And they could have asked the hospitals, but they felt like the hospitals were really overburdened. And this group, who'd been doing testing for them very efficiently, said, we have an idea, let's do a mass clinic at the convention center. And I would stress that clinic was very successful. They vaccinated 2,800 people in 2 days. So then the group, flush with that success, went off the deep end. They incorporated as a for-profit. They said they put up a website so people could register for the vaccine, which alarmed the city. And the city did not, the city, because of the vaccine supply, was not ready for that step yet. But they hastily put up their own because they didn't want people to use it. And then they found out that the group had said in its incorporating documents that it would sell the information that people entered into their website. So that was why the city, that was the thing that made the city end its association with them. But it wasn't, the city wasn't actually, they were planning for a way to get the vaccine in, and this group presented them with a plan. They presented it to city council too. I mean, it was a kind of a group effort that gave this group that opportunity, but it's over now. The city is not using them. The city is actually, and I'll add to Jerry's point about the inequity in the vaccine distribution, the city is using its own health centers and the 20 federally qualified health clinics. Those are community-based health centers in low-income communities of color. Those staffs are now doing outreach directly to their patients and bringing them in and giving them the vaccine and setting up the appointment for the second dose. And that's how, and this is for the next group, the city did not use the state's recommendation of 65 and over. They're looking at people 75 and over and with chronic health conditions. And so now there's a real push now that they're expanding the group that can get it. They're through the healthcare workers, they're on to the next group. There's really an effort to make sure that it gets into communities of color.
Hey, Mike DiNardo, what are you going to do for when we first get back to normal, whatever that means?
I'd like to go back to the ballpark and watch the Phillies. But Ian, I think the first thing I'd really like to do is to go see former Genesis guitarist Steve Hackett with you. I think we were going to do that, and then the concert got canceled.
I can't wait. Oh, I forgot about that.
Yeah.
Front row. I cannot imagine being near people for an extended period of time, but that would be nice one of these days. Anybody else? Cherry, I know you've been walking like there's no tomorrow.
Yes, I'm an avid spinner. That has been the thing that I've done for the past 10 plus years to stay in shape. And most of the spin clubs are closed now, and I can't see them coming back anytime soon. And so I laced up the walking shoes, even got like a really cool walking coat, so that I can walk several miles a day, a few times a week to stay in shape. Because the last thing you want to do is hunker down and end up, with all sorts of other comorbidities because you're inactive. And so I live in the city. There's a lot of trails around here. And quick tidbit, $5 lifts in your shoes really save your ankles. the best $5 I've ever spent. Improved my walking sneakers so much because I was getting like ankle fatigue from walking so much. But I put those lifts in and I can go all day. Put on a good book, keep it moving, clear your head.
You mean KYW? You put on KYW.
Oh, yes. Well, KYW In-Depth Podcast.
There you go. Or the Flashpoint.
That In-Depth Podcast, or you can check out Flashpoint. You can do that too. But yeah, either that's how I learn. I learn through the walks. So yeah, walking, it helps.
All right, we're a little over time. I do want to ask one more question from the audience. Anybody who wants to pick this up, we've got the doctor, we have city, suburbs, we have New Jersey represented here. When can group 2, or when can the next groups realistically expect to have access to the vaccine?
I wish I had that answer. I think we don't know those numbers yet of what's out there and what's happening in the groups we're doing, and that's the concern. I do think what's important, and I'm seeing it happen firsthand, working again in health with the healthcare system doing it. There are efforts now ramping up the way it's going to be distributed. For instance, you're going to have drive-through things, and like all these things are happening. So what's good about this is, yes, the vaccine's not in the numbers we want to get to group 2 yet, but concurrently, people are building and figuring out the distribution methods. They're looking at the electronic medical record systems and how to make them work functioning, because it's all different. If you think about it, most of us who have an office, we give out flu shots every year, and we kind of do it at a certain rate. And you want to get to that point, because I do anticipate there'll be boosters down the road for coronavirus vaccines, in the future. But right now, because of the mass numbers, they're building up mass distribution ways to do it. And most importantly, like you saw what they were saying, keeping those records. One of the concerns I've seen is some people have gotten first doses and they weren't even aware they're supposed to get a second dose. And you're only at 50 or 55% protection. You got to get that second dose, and you got to get it in a timely fashion to get to that 94, 95%. That's critical.
Again, using Montgomery County as an example, Commissioner Val Arkush said that the expansion of 65 and over added anywhere from 230,000 to 250,000 people, and she's saying that the model that the state is using of pharmacies and private practices is great when they have enough vaccine. But right now, with the severe limitation of vaccine, she's saying it should be going to a centralized location in the counties that can do it, like Montgomery, Chester, and Bucks counties that have health departments and could do a centralized distribution, rather than kind of this scattershot approach that's going on right now, because the supply is so limited. So down the road, when you get more supply, then you can bring in those pharmacies and doctors' offices. And again, what Cherry said, extremely important to have groups that are reaching out to any groups that are historically have reason to be concerned about getting vaccinated, or concerned about a county handling the centralized distribution. But she's Dr. Arkush has said they could be doing 5,000 shots a day, but they're only getting 4,500 doses this week. So, there are other pharmacies that are getting, 500 to 1,000 in Montgomery County. Why not centralize that? And it's also confusing to people signing up, because people sign up with the county, they think they signed up, but you have to sign up with each individual pharmacy. You have to sign up with each individual, medical practice. And that, as we are seeing, is also people are trying to get to the front of the line. People who have money are trying to make agreements with pharmacies on the side, whether it's financial, whether it's, promotional, whatever. There are other concerns, again, because the supply is so limited. So, that's one argument for centralization until there's a wider supply.
Okay. Thank you guys so much, Cherry, Kristen, Mike, Pat, Jim, Dr. Brian. I really appreciate your time and your insight and your expertise, and to all of you for spending your morning with us, and any time that you spend with us on the radio, we really appreciate. We love you guys for it. Thank you.